Hey, Skift listeners, hear about the latest trends in the travel industry with the Brand USA Talks Travel podcast. Right now, listen to special live from IPW interviews featuring U.S. Travel's Jeff Freeman.
DMOs are at the heartbeat of U.S. travel.
Liz Bittner from Travel South.
A lot of key gateway markets are back.
LA Tourism's Adam Burke.
We all win when we all partner together.
Plus, Brand USA's Stacey Melman and Jackie Ennis with international travel trends and Chris Thompson's farewell finale. I'm Mark Lapidus. Join us for Brand USA Talks Travel on your favorite podcast platform.
Brand USA Talks Travel.
Hello to all of our wonderful listeners, and welcome back to the Skift Travel podcast with Sarah and Seth. Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you.
So this episode will air on July 4th. So obviously we want to wish all of our listeners in the U.S. a very happy Independence Day. Now, awkwardly enough, we were just reviewing our analytics, and our second highest group of listeners comes from the United Kingdom. So to those limey redcoats, I would say, look, no hard feelings. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you're with us.
Yeah, we got a long weekend. We got a long weekend out of it this year.
That's all worth it for the long weekend. Yeah, that's right. Now, look, the way if you're an international listener, the way you celebrate July 4th in the United States is you spend some time grilling, you go take a dip in a pool, maybe you shoot off some fireworks in the backyard. Fireworks are a big part of this. And that means this is a big travel weekend. So that means that if you're traveling and you want to have a pool and you want to have a backyard grill and you want to do fireworks, you're probably going to have to stay in a short-term rental to have the space for all of those patriotic activities. And so for this very special July 4th episode, special for multiple reasons, because we've got an amazing guest with us, and that's Jamie Lane, the Chief Economist and SVP of Data Analytics for AirDNA. Thanks for joining us, Jamie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start with this particular holiday, Jamie. So you have a lot of insights into booking data. That's what AirDNA really looks at. So is the short-term rental industry going to have a profitable and successful 4th of July weekend? What is the outlook that you all are seeing there?
Yeah, and successful, yes. Profitable, that's hard to say.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting when you're talking about, and this year we get a long weekend, because when we compared July 4th to last year, if you guys remember it was like this weird Tuesday, July 4th, and you're like, when do I take off? The weekend before, the week after? And it ended up being not a great year for travel, at least comparatively. And this year, now that we're on air on July 4th, it's a Thursday.
Yeah, it's a Thursday.
I know I'm physically here in Atlanta today. On July 4th, I'll be up in Maine near Acadia National Park celebrating with my family. It's on a Thursday. Most people are combining it with a long weekend. So we're actually seeing a great year for travel compared to last year. When we pulled the data last week, it was up about 10% year over year. When we pulled it this week, it was up almost 15% year over year. So as we get closer to July 4th, and with a lot of travel, people are booking last minute, and we're seeing that absolutely happening this year.
That is very last minute to have a 5% year-on-year bump in just 1 week before the holidays. I guess everyone was thinking they were gonna have another Tuesday or Wednesday, and they're like, "Oh, wait a second, I got to do something with this long weekend, huh?"
Well, I'll give you one example, Seth. I didn't know we had Friday off until
Neither
today.
did I. Jamie, we gotta talk. I gotta book a short-term rental for this weekend now.
Yeah.
It's funny, similar to us, my wife wasn't going to come up to Maine till the week after. And then she just realized she had Friday off. So I called, it was like 2 days ago, to move her flight so she could come up a week earlier. And we actually saved money. Delta was like, yeah, we're going to refund you $500 because you're now traveling on July 4th. And it worked out.
Wow. I'm glad. Hey, that's a win-win-win. Actually, that was going to be my next question is like broader travel industry. Obviously, you are a short-term rental guru, but you also you have some insights in like where people are going for July 4th.
Yep.
And I was just curious if you have any trends there, like that maybe for a broader audience, like are people taking a lot of flights? Is it more road trips? Is it more, do you have a sense of where people are going and when they're going?
Yeah, maybe I'll give you a sense of two metrics in terms of like levels of demand. One, is the markets we see the most demand booked for July 4th this year. So I don't think it would surprise you, this list. Like you got Orlando, Myrtle Beach, Santa Rosa, Rosemary Beach, Gulf Shores, Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Panama City, like our top markets for overall demand. Now, when we look at occupancy, you see a slightly different list. Number one market, over 90% occupied for July 4th weekend, is the Outer Banks, North Carolina. Yeah. Then you've got Cape San Blas, St. George Island, Door County up in Wisconsin, Destin, Fort Walton Beach, again, Santa Rosa, Rosemary Beach. So a good mix of both ocean, lake markets, but clearly, and it's where people are, and these are classic July 4th destinations.
Yeah. Where fireworks are presumably mostly legal in many of those locations being the key, of course. You got to be able to blow stuff up.
Yep.
So the read-through then is positive. I mean, some of those are going to be drive-to destinations, but many of them people will be flying in and certainly spending a lot of time. Those are not like New York City urban.
Yeah, I was just going to say, these aren't urban destinations. People aren't going to the city. Do they ever? Or is that something that's new this year, that it's really rural and beach locations that are so popular?
No, you go back to 2019 and the lists look entirely different.
Really?
Yeah.
Say more about that.
Yes, some areas like the beach, Orlando, Myrtle Beach were high, but in the top 5 were New York and Los Angeles.
Wow.
And Los Angeles is still in the top 10 for total volume, but New York's fallen out, not even in the top 20 anymore. And we all know what happened in New York.
Yeah, I was going to say, so how much do you think is actually because of that, of the short-term rental ban, essentially, that New York City put in place?
It's a big part. I don't think it would still be in the top 5, but it wouldn't be entirely out. So we've gone, in terms of number of short-term rentals available in New York City, from 25,000 to 4,000.
Right. Yeah. So what are the fastest growing markets? Like, not just for the 4th of July weekend, just kind of overall for short-term rentals. Where are people putting them?
Yeah. So when you look at areas that are growing the fastest, and you wouldn't recognize most of these markets as typical like short-term rental markets. It's mostly the small and mid-sized cities throughout the country. A lot of Texas markets like McAllen, Lubbock, Waco. It's areas like and Chattanooga, Birmingham. It's these mid-sized type cities that are seeing really strong overall demand.
Yeah.
Supply is able to grow as there's not a lot of regulation in these cities, they're doing relatively well. So in those type cities, the sort of mid-sized cities, we're seeing growth north of 15% on both supply and demand. When you look at the typical urban large city market, we're actually seeing demand and supply go down overall, and it's not just New York; it's quite a few other cities. And then when you look at the traditional vacation rental beach mountain destinations, we're seeing growth of anywhere from 5 to 10%. So it's not strong like we had been seeing, but it's not weak like the cities, but it's I'd say healthy growth we're seeing there.
So I just want to repeat that so I've got it in my mind. So you're kind of saying there's like these 3 tiers. There's sort of cities, which are maybe flat to down. Then you've got the classic destinations, which are 10-ish, and then you've got these new emerging mid-sized destinations that are 15 plus is sort of what you're seeing.
Yep.
So mid-sized cities, do you think this is sustainable, or are they all going to close? Like, why are people going there if they're not traditional vacation destinations?
Yeah, I think one is what we're seeing on the hotel side. Like you are not seeing any new hotel development in any of these cities. Like if you look at STR's hotel pipeline, like it's almost entirely top 25 markets. Many of these cities have seen massive growth over the past 4 years, both inbound migration and just new businesses starting, opening, and they're really high growth areas. So if you have all this economic activity happening, all these people moving in, all these people doing business in these markets, and there's not hotels coming in to accommodate these people, like short-term rentals are really the only thing left. So yes, regulation could come in, but I'd argue that that'd be pretty detrimental to the local economies and their ability to continue to grow.
And have hotels just given up? Like, are they pretty much just acquiescing these areas to the short-term rentals, or is it just the short-term rentals are coming in and filling a need that would have always been there?
I wouldn't say hotels are giving up. I would say maybe lenders aren't comfortable with the risk associated with these smaller towns. So, uh, would are there hotel developers that would love to go in? Absolutely. Are there the regional banks that right now are comfortable with hotel development? Like, probably
Yeah.
not. So,
I,
and I would say it's great for what could be new hotel development, that short-term rental operators are sort of testing the waters, proving the demand makeup that hotels could come in and fill in later on.
I'm so glad we've got an economist on the podcast because we're finally talking banking and all this sort of stuff and how it matters. Did interest rates have a role to play in that too? Like, I think I have a theory that interest rates are really hurt in the hotel construction pipeline. Is that a part of this too? Is it just the banks, or is it also the Federal Reserve, which we could finally mention on this podcast?
No, it's definitely a combination. Like, you talk with developers, it's not the type of environment right now that you want to go out and get like a hard money construction loan. Like, you're paying out the nose for that. And then even when you go into refinance and sort of stabilized view, and rates are still very high and it's hard to make the numbers work. So I think if you get a couple years down the line where interest rates come down, regional banks start to lend again, that you could open up construction again. But yeah, right now it's hard. It's hard for short-term rental investors too. So a lot of these units that are coming in are maybe units that were in long-term rental, that people are seeing the benefits and the higher margins of renting it out on a short-term basis, and moving in. One of the fastest growing really areas in these sort of small to mid-size is what we call midterm rentals. So it's that mix between short-term and long-term, like anywhere from 3-week to 3-month rentals.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a topic that you covered just a couple of weeks ago, Sarah, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we heard from several people that said, the medium term rental is really this kind of, it's a bit of a salvation for a lot of folks who have kind of been regulated out of the short term rental game but didn't want to go into the long term space. So there's all kinds of new business popping up in that particular, like, I don't know, no man's land, I guess, of time periods.
And it's almost like a gold rush now to like go into it, right? You've got Airbnb pushing into it, and then you have like Zillow, you've got Furnish Finder, you've got Zumper, you've got all these companies like on the short term and on the long term side. Like, all right, who's going to fill in? Who's going to own that middle ground?
Oh, I wanted to ask you, Jamie, because we were talking a bit about, we're on the topic of interest rates a little bit. We're on the topic of these developments. I want to something you said in the very first sentence, and I kind of let it slide. I want to bring it back. I said, it's going to be a good holiday. It's going to be successful, but maybe not profitable.
Yeah.
I wanted to push you on that a little bit, because in some of these markets where we say, look, there's these new homeowners coming in, there's new supply coming in, there's been conversation about whether this new supply is coming in profitably. And are people still driving occupancy and actual profits instead of just driving bookings? So what is your thoughts there in terms of what we've seen, and also what we are seeing in terms of how the summer's shaping up?
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the strength for July 4th comes from sort of the date shift. Like, it is a good weekend. When we look at actual short-term rental performance over the past couple of years, we're definitely down from the highs of 2021. So we've seen almost 2 consecutive years of declining RevPARs, 2 consecutive years of declining occupancies. Last year, ADRs were down. So we are, I think, on this precipice where we could start to see growth. And a big piece of that is supply growth slowing. So this last month, supply growth across the entire short-term rental industry was only up about 7%. And that compares to last year, supply was up about 15%. And the year before that, supply was up about 22%. So it's slowing. And then when we look at the demand side, it's right around the 7-8% range the past few months. So and supply slowing just enough where demands can start to outpace it, which means occupancy declines again, or gains again. But it's razor edge. Like most, about half markets are still seeing declines. Half of markets are starting to see increases. So, uh, it's really a market by market basis on whether we're seeing sort of profitable growth. And some areas are definitely and having some weakness out there. But others, there's sort of, and we talked about it. I talked about it on stage at the Skift conference, your short-term rental summit a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the mountain coastal markets, they're still above 2019 levels and are doing relatively good, though down from the highs of 2021. You look at the urban suburban areas, they're still really hurting. Never really recovered. Still well below 2018, 2019 levels. And we haven't talked about it yet, but the impact of international travel in the US is still a major factor of, and we've got Americans traveling domestically this year. We've got Americans traveling overseas this year, but we still don't have a lot of international travelers coming and visiting the US, which and was a real bright spot of the industry in 2018, 2019.
All right. Well, we will talk about that and much, much more with Jamie when we come back right after this.
Hey, Skift listeners, hear about the latest trends in the travel industry with the Brand USA Talks Travel podcast. Right now, listen to special live from IPW interviews featuring U.S. Travel's Jeff Freeman.
DMOs are at the heartbeat of U.S. travel.
Liz Bittner from Travel South.
A lot of key gateway markets are back.
LA Tourism's Adam Burke.
We all win when we all partner together.
Plus, Brand USA's Stacey Melman and Jackie Ennis with international travel trends and Chris Thompson's farewell finale. I'm Mark Lapidus. Join us for Brand USA Talks Travel on your favorite podcast platform.
Brand USA Talks Travel.
Welcome back from the break. Where we left you, Jamie had just teased a conversation about international inbound travel and their visitation to the short-term rental market here in the U.S. And I think that is a great place where we're going to pick up. So, what are we seeing in terms of visitors? You had said that the number one market was Outer Banks. Are we seeing Europeans come in to visit the Outer Banks or not?
No, we're not. But most of the markets that are doing really well around July 4th are domestically driven. A lot of the ones that aren't doing as well were ones that were more primarily international inbound driven. And we're actually seeing diverging performance among some of the largest cities, where some of the East Coast cities that are more dependent on European markets are doing relatively well. So when we look at travel from like Germany, Italy, the UK, inbound travel is only down anywhere from 5 to 15%. And then you look at some of our more West Coast markets that were more dependent on Asian travelers. We're seeing much weaker performance. And you look at travel from China and Japan, it's down 50% relative to 2019 levels.
Yeah.
And you think like San Francisco, Seattle, LA, a real large part of their inbound travel was from those Asian travelers. Like China was I think number 4 country for inbound visitations in 2019. Even higher that in 2017. It started seeing decline during the Trump presidency. Now they're number 10.
Yep.
Like it's crazy how few travelers we're now getting. And we actually do have one bright spot. There's one major inbound country that is 36% above 2019 levels. It is now the number 4 and was number 10. Can you guess what country that is?
I have a guess, but I think it's India. That's my guess.
It is India. Yeah, India travel is way up, and we're actually seeing it sustain growth. Like it's great to see.
What's interesting about India is that the flight times, I think, are almost about the same to New York as they are to LA, though. So you probably don't see as much of that West Coast versus East Coast dynamic that you would see someone from Tokyo or Beijing. I think there's a lot of Indian diaspora in the New York East Coast area. So that probably
Yes.
also splits.
Yeah,
your...
we do see it way more spread out than the travel from China and Japan.
So let's talk a little bit about the various listing platforms like Airbnb versus Vrbo versus Booking. I'm curious what you're seeing there, the different dynamics. And, investors, they seem to think that Vrbo is struggling. And does your data really jive with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you hear it from and their public calls. You hear it from and Tim Lazoio at the conference. And they definitely have some weakness. And it's both on the booking side and on the supply growth side. Their ability to attract new hosts, new property managers to the site. We're seeing supply on Vrbo only up about 4 or 5%. In Europe, we actually see it down a little bit. And then you contrast that to Airbnb, and we've got supply up anywhere from 17, 20%. In Europe, it's north of that. In the US, it's significantly below that. But they're doing really well at both attracting new hosts to their platform and able to drive new bookings. So we're seeing 10, 15% growth in booking activity for Airbnb, where we're still seeing it decline on a year-over-year basis for Vrbo.
Hey, Jamie, can I say something? Because I'm surprised to hear that, because Airbnb is traditionally, its strongholds are those urban cities, that the exact ones that you said are struggling. And traditionally, I would think that a Vrbo in the Outer Banks, that's exactly where I would see a Vrbo. So I feel like help me square that circle. Like, why would Airbnb do so well when you're telling us that urban destinations are also having a hard time?
Yeah, one is that Vrbo has zero exposure to the small and mid-sized cities, which are now bigger than urban areas for Airbnb. And then Airbnb's done so well over the past 4 years of attracting supply in the coastal mountain markets that they've just overtaken Vrbo by so much. They've seen so much. Airbnb actually has more listings in coastal and mountain destinations than Vrbo does now. Where that wasn't the case pre-pandemic.
Are you seeing that? I'm curious. I would have thought that most hosts cross list just with everyone. Is that not the case?
It's not the case. So when you look at an overall, we see about, I think in the US, it's about 30, 35% of hosts cross listing. It's very, very high percent for property managers. And in those coastal and mountain markets that are dominated by property managers, it's north of like 70%. But in the small and mid-sized cities and in the large metro areas, most hosts are only on Airbnb and they're not cross-listing on Vrbo. And because those are now such a large percent of overall supply, that sort of brings the overall average down.
Is it just too hard? Like just too complicated to keep the calendar straight?
It is hard if you're not using a PMS. So that's where we've seen, and you guys had Guest CEO on, like they're going to be $1 billion company. They've seen so much growth, and a big piece of what they host away. We just acquired Uplisting. And a big piece of what they allow is easy cross-listing across Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking.com, Google Vacation Rentals, just making that super simple. And where it's only about 30% cross-listed, if you go back to 2018, it was only about 10%. So we've seen a massive growth in the percent of listings cross-listing. And Guesty, HostAway, we've sort of been able to ride that growth.
One of the interesting things about the Airbnb versus Vrbo and Booking conversation, in my opinion, has been that Airbnb leans really heavily into these yurts and tree houses and houseboats. And I think I just saw you post something that's how big of these homes are, it's what features in their marketing, but how big a part of this business is the yurt business for Airbnb?
The yurt business.
The yurt industry.
Yeah.
And we categorize them together, and in our platform we call it like unique stays, and it includes yurts, lighthouses, tiny homes, tree houses, and it's only about 4% of overall listings on Airbnb, where pre-pandemic it was about 2%. So it's grown as a share, but it's still a relatively small percent. But as you said, a large percent of maybe the overall visual appeal of Airbnb, and it's like having icons when you go on Airbnb. Like it's the first thing that comes in. Like only a small percent, if anyone's actually going to book it, but it gets your mind imagining of what you might could do, and then you're going to go and book that 4-bedroom house at the beach anyway. But
Yeah.
at least sort of sparks that imagination. I think is a pretty fun way to think about what could happen, where you could stay.
I was actually just going to ask you that. Like, what do you think of Airbnb's doubling down kind of on this icon strategy, so to speak? Do you think it's going to work for them? Do you think this is going to be as big as Brian Chesky thinks it's going to be?
And is it ever going to be a large percent of their revenue? No. Is it ever? I mean, does it really work into their strategy of like growing the base of people that are sort of thinking about Airbnb? That and it allows them to partner and with celebrities and emerging markets that they're trying to grow supply, that they're trying to grow guests. The fact that you have to use their app to book one. I think their last earnings call, they're having like 50-60% growth in sort of app downloads. And when you're able to get more users, more guests using their app, maybe for the first time, that can expand their overall sort of potential group of people that might book through the platform. So one, I think it's a great strategy of driving app usage, just like how they announced, group messaging. So you're going to add your entire group, and now your entire group has to download the Airbnb app. And like where before maybe only the one person that booked it is going to have the app, now maybe everyone has it. And just the ability to sort of grow the base of people globally that might book a short-term rental in the future because of that, I think it's a great strategy on Brian's part.
But the vast majority, I mean, you said this, right? The vast majority of bookings on Airbnb are not these like unique places to stay. And I mean, I'm curious if you have a number in mind. We did some research when Airbnb first came public, and I think we put something like some huge share, like 70% plus of Airbnb gross bookings came from professional multi-property managers. And does that sound right to you, or am I way off?
That sounds very high.
All right.
So we estimate it today at about like 20%. And we've seen that grow a bit over time. So as more and more professional managers are actually coming on to Airbnb, because remember, for a long time, professional managers weren't on Airbnb. They're like, oh, that's that's the app for individual hosts, not professionals. Like, I'm never going to list on there. And now you've got a very large percent of all the professional managers that are now on Airbnb, which has grown their share. But it's still a relatively small percent, like 20% of their bookings. Like, they're still very dominated by the individual hosts out there.
So where do you think the market is going in terms of professionalization? Do you think that 20% is going to continue to grow, or are we going to level out?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you mean professionalization. Because, we could define it as large vacation rental management companies. And we're actually still seeing the fastest growth coming from the large professional managers. So they're expanding. There's more and more vacation rental management companies starting every day. They're growing. They're expanding. So that's great. What we see, though, like maybe another way to talk about professionalization is just like what type of review scores are we getting. You actually see the strongest review scores from the individual hosts. Like they're crushing it in terms of getting 5-star reviews. And it's clear that guests actually prefer overall to stay with individual hosts, or at least they're saying that with the review scores that they're getting.
Well, so this was a conversation we had at the short-term rental summit. It was about like how big can a professional property manager get before they sort of lose some of the magic of what makes a short-term rental feel great. I mean, did you have I don't know if you heard some of those conversations, but like, do you have a thought on that? Like, is there a too big for a professional property manager? Is there a size at which they can't grow anymore?
Yeah. And when we look at, and clearly we see some of the larger ones starting to slow down or contract a bit. Where we see the large property managers that are actually doing really well and continue to gain occupancy, gain rates, sort of operate profitable is actually on the upper end. So upscale luxury type operators. There, we do see that the best ones, though, are very much regional. Like they are in a few markets on the upper end. Like they're sort of maxing out at 1,000, 2,000 listings, not pushing much further above that. So I think we have yet to see a large operator really operate efficiently, profitably at scale. So is it impossible? I don't think so. Have we seen someone do it right yet? I think that's yet to be seen.
Speaking of operations, Jamie, I think you just got into the business of operating a short-term rental as well, right?
I'm close. So I'm in that sort of in between. Bought a short-term rental, bought a house up in North Georgia. We're in the process of designing, furnishing, amenitizing it, hoping to go live later this summer.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but Sarah is also a short-term rental owner and operator. Well, not operator, but owner. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, so what is your experience been for both of you, I guess? What's the experience been like as individual owners working with these companies? Like, how does that work, being a part of the industry and then also being a part of the industry? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what do you think?
So, I mean, my situation, I'm like a walking cliche. We panicked. My husband and I, we panic bought a farmhouse up in the Catskills during the pandemic because my kids were little and I didn't think I was going to make it like through lockdown. And then, the world kind of quicker than we originally expected went back to normal. The kids went back to school. We came back to Brooklyn and we decided to, Airbnb the house. I'm going to use it as a verb because everybody else does. And it's great now because we've kind of got it going and we have a system and it's pretty like hands off from us. But at first it wasn't like that. It was hard at first. There's definitely a knack to it and things go wrong. And that's the thing that really surprises me. Just the vast breadth of things that can possibly go wrong. Weird things that you would never expect, right? And so, luckily we are, we're only a couple hours away and we use the house a lot. So we go up there, ourselves. So it's not like, so we are definitely like far from professional property owners. So we're up there so we can fix stuff and, restock the toilet paper when it's out and all of that just because, we're so close. But it's definitely been an education and it's been great for me at Skift to kind of be so intimately familiar with the good, the bad, and the ugly of this sector of the space because it is so important to everything we cover.
And Seth, as you can imagine, for me, it's the exact opposite. I overanalyzed everything about picking a market, picking a property, ran the numbers on every single comp. I think I know.
I did none of that. Yeah, I did none of that. Like, absolutely not. I was like, this house looks good. Let's buy it. Yeah. Continue.
Yeah. So I know every single comparable listing in like a 20-mile radius, what they're doing well, what they're doing not well, how we're going to crush them. So yeah, it's I think going into it not with too rose-colored glasses though, because we know it. I talk with operators, talk with owners all day. I know the challenges associated with it, but excited to start to have my own stories. I know in the sort of discussions with my wife, like this is clearly my project, but we're all going to benefit from being able to use it occasionally as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because like it represents like the investor, like the real hardened investor, and then we also have like like I think you look at the occupancy down, you're like, oh, the Catskills occupancy is down, but Sarah's just using it with her family. You know what I mean? It's not bad occupancy. It's just it's interesting to see this variation.
Yeah, I'm really like we were really lucky. We didn't know it, but we are like a half an hour away from Cooperstown, which is where they do the Little League World Series every summer, and like Baseball Hall of Fame. So it's like Jamie, you were saying how you ran all the comps. We just we completely lucked into that. So our summers are pretty busy. We have baseball families there all summer usually. So.
Yeah, and I do think it is one of the maybe thoughts out there that most hosts are taking it and really professional, most of the rentals out there are full time. And in reality, like most of the listings out there are only being listed part time. Most people are using it a large percent of the time. It is very much a tool that people use to make money on properties that they would have otherwise been using when they're not, that they can get use out of otherwise underutilized assets.
Yeah, I mean, we never thought we would make any money. I don't think you ever make any money off of a 200-year-old farmhouse. Now I know this. But yeah, it just defers the cost. That's what it does. It just helps.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our conversation. That's like we've had so many lessons from what's happening this summer to how to make money off of a 200-year-old farmhouse, and it turns out
you can't. Yeah, that's the lesson.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. I've really, really genuinely enjoyed this conversation. And if any listeners want to learn more, it's AirDNA, and that's where they can get in touch with you, right?
Yeah, AirDNA.co. I'm active on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and then host a podcast of my own, the STR Data Lab, which is a weekly show.
All right. Well, I think all of our viewers should go and follow that podcast. And while they're at it, maybe follow the Skift Travel podcast as well. Maybe you stumbled upon this, you haven't followed it. And if you like this episode, don't forget to like it or rate it 5 stars. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.